This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hey everybody, it's Eleanor and Kristen, and we're from the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, and we have been switching things up. You may have noticed if you tuned into the last episode. We're slowing down and digging a little deeper in our books. We heard from you that maybe it would be a little more interesting if we took a little more time. So instead of cramming one book into one episode, we're breaking it into bite-sized conversations that focus on one practical idea at a time. You're still going to get our honest take, science-based insights, real-life stories, but now with more clarity, more impact, and more ways to apply what you learn.
Tired of feeling stuck in your health journey? At Well Balanced Nutrition, we understand that achieving your health goals isn't just about what you eat. It's about overcoming the mental roadblocks holding you back. Our team of expert nutrition coaches is here to guide you every step of the way, helping you break through mindset barriers and reach your full potential. Don't let mindset barriers stand in the way of your health and happiness. Call Well Balanced Nutrition today and start your journey to a better you. And we are talking about the book Forever Strong
By Gabrielle Lyon.
Gabrielle Lyon.
Okay, I'll get her name right eventually.
I know, right?
Hey,
okay.
Listen, I have looked at her podcast. Have you all done that?
I have not.
Well, I hope if you listened last episode, maybe you went and checked this gal out. She's quite a talker, and she's got interesting guests on her podcast on interesting topics. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think she's got something to say. Might be worth listening to. Let's talk about her book.
Let's do it. So the big idea we're talking about today is muscle as the key to longevity, or the fountain of youth, as she says.
Mm-hmm. And how about disease prevention?
Well, I think that's part of it, right?
Yeah, if you don't get sick and die, you're going to live long, right?
Uh-huh. The healthy aging. We'll talk about all that today. Mm-hmm. The higher your healthy muscle mass, the greater your protection against all-cause mortality.
Yeah, she says disease of aging really is disease of impaired muscle.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of interesting.
So let's unpack that.
Okay.
Left unchecked, the body goes into a state of constant decline. And specifically, we lose muscle mass starting as early as age 30, which Eleanor mentioned last time is sarcopenia. And that's age-related decline, but we could technically lose muscle at any age. Like if we're on bed rest for any reason, if we're not using muscle, we can be losing it.
Yeah, and I remember as a young gal, I had a great opportunity. I worked at a physical fitness institute in Charleston, West Virginia, and it was one of the first cardiac rehab programs, maybe the first, where they were getting people up from cardiac surgery immediately and bringing them to the gym, and I would throw medicine balls at these guys with the chest incisions, and they recovered well. And years later, I'm down here in Wake Forest University in North Carolina, and they have a premier cardiac rehabilitation program that Dr. Miller started here many years ago, and has been visited from people from all over the world. It influenced this idea of maybe we shouldn't leave people in bed too long. And I know people who have respiratory illnesses, or they've been hospitalized, or broken hips, and they've been still too long, and their recoveries are not smooth. So I think this idea of, even though we're injured or hurt, their muscles are doing something. If we can move the ones that can move, will help the rest of the body recover.
Right.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
So even if your legs are out, move your arms. That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, tell us more about your time. So you were doing the exercise programs after surgery?
Well, I was a young person in late teen years, maybe early 20s, that kind of thing. But it was a design program with people out of Albany. I wish I could call the guy's name. I wrote the book on cardiac rehabilitation, Sarah, and it'll come to me eventually. But anyway, out of Albany, there were people connected from other places that were working with Lawrence Frankel, who was the fellow that was running the institute that I was involved in. And so it was research. And, Kenneth Cooper had been in there from the aerobics. I mean, he started the whole aerobic movement of people need to move.
Yeah.
It's good for you. And so we were doing those things. We had ergometers that we would put these people on, and we could track sort of their VO2s before we really had all that instrumentation.
Were you doing research on this?
I was not.
Okay.
But it was being done.
Other people were,
other people were doing it. I was one of the implementers. I was one of the little scuts that said, okay, you go in there and make sure they catch this medicine ball.
Yeah.
And they were leather. They were those old leather, heavy medicine balls. And we had the Swedish stuff on the walls, the bars and things that, important. It's fun.
What a neat program
I'm a lucky woman.
Yeah.
I've had an interesting, fun go of it.
Well, anyway.
Talk about longevity.
Yeah. Well, anybody who's ever broken an arm or a leg and you're in a cast and you can see that muscle wasting, right? It's a good example of that. Or if you've been on bed rest. So, let's talk about why that's so detrimental when we lose muscle. And it's because we're losing protection against things like inflammation. We're losing protection against cancer and things that can come up. So she talks about obesity being linked to 13 different cancers. So that's the prevention side. Yeah.
And you remember I talked about myokines last time?
Yes.
Oh, and excuse me, I'm eating some protein.
Good for you.
Yeah, good. The myokines, that interleukin series, there are a bunch of other ones besides interleukin 6, but that one has a role in inflammation and also probably in the production of antioxidants and things that are protective against cellular damage, which is how cancers occur at the cellular level. You get a disruption in the cell cycle and the control of that. It's fascinating.
And it's interesting because that myokine can also be, well, maybe it's not even a myokine, but that inflammatory marker, if it's seen in other parts of the body, can be bad news. But if it's part of the muscle, it's actually a good sign for inflammation.
Well, inflammation is it's part of our being to say we have a system that can be triggered when you're insulted, whether it's an injury or an infection, foreign bodies, that kind of thing.
Right. Inflammation in itself is not bad.
No,
it's very helpful.
It's
chronic.
Acute, exactly.
Acute chronic inflammation.
Acute is good. Chronic is not.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Thanks. I was combining the two.
Yes, you were.
Yeah. So, and we hear that exercise causes inflammation, but to your point, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's helpful for us.
Because every time you move your muscle, you damage it, and it's got to recover. So you get into that metabolic thing. When we talk about metabolism, there's two parts to it. One where you're building and one where you're breaking down. And so anabolism versus catabolism. And catabolism is when you're chewing stuff up. So if you're damaged, then you want to build back those actin and myosin fibrils. You want to build back the cell membrane or whatever's been damaged. Mm-hmm. And so your body will signal, we need to build.
Yeah.
And then if you don't stop, you never recover. And we read another book called The Switch, which we'll talk about later, I think, which is about autophagy and catabolism.
Yeah. And nutrition plays a key role in helping build that muscle back. And we'll talk about that probably on another topic because that's another deep dive. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have prevention or protection against chronic inflammation. We have protection against cancer. We have this thing called cachexia, which is when you lose weight after a cancer diagnosis. But if you have more muscle, you're more protected against that. And she does go into this whole, I don't know if you have anything to say about it, but she promotes resistance training with to protect against cachexia or wasting away. And the research recommendations seem not as positive as she is about it. But she's like, that's a shame. We should promote this because it could help you.
Stimulation.
Yeah. And then protection against dementia. So we know that, excess fat, especially around the waistline, is associated with increased risk of dementia. and fatigue, because we have, and Eleanor, you can correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but less mitochondria from our muscles, and then we feel fatigued.
Yeah, because your mitochondria is the energy production factory in your cell. And so that sugar that we've been talking about, glucose in particular, is part of the aerobic respiration pathway, which goes into this thing that's so cool called the Krebs cycle. Nobody cares but me. And it kicks
You're going
out.
to give dietitians a flashback and nightmare.
Yeah. But it kicks out these other energy currency molecules called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And that adenosine triphosphate is holding energy in these triple bonds. There are 3 phosphates hooked to this thing. And when you break that bond, boom, here comes the energy to drive the rest of the operations of the cell or your body. And so your muscles require energy to move. So you've got to have mitochondria. And when you're moving, it's interesting, the mitochondria will divide and you'll get more of them. And so they respond to the need for power. We need more power. And so there's chemical signaling that's really important that says it's okay to divide now and kick out some more energy for these cells to move.
So cool.
It is cool.
Well, she says aging does not mean we have to become less conditioned. We don't have to just say, oh, I'm going to lose muscle, so let it happen.
Can I go into here again? So we've read 2 books about longevity, right?
Yes.
One was Lifespan and the other one was Outlive. Yeah. David Sinclair and Peter Attia. Mm-hmm. And I remember them talking so much about muscle in there, do you? They were more biochemical signaling compounds or something.
Right.
So I thought this is a compliment to those 2 books. And I'd like to get the 3 of them in a room.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Now, Peter Attia in Outlive, he did, talk about walking with a weighted vest.
Mm-hmm. Rucking,
thank you. I was like, oh, it has a name. I can't remember it. And so he did have some information, but it was, it was a different approach than Dr. Lyon is taking.
Yeah, because she's totally focused on muscle.
Right, which is needed, I think.
I do too.
It's cool to focus just on this because we underestimate the power of it.
But both of them, and Sinclair in particular says aging is a disease. It's not normal. Like you should be able to live to 300.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, we had a kind of interesting conversation there. And Peter Attia, I don't know that he went that far. And she's not either. What she's saying is quality and longevity. She's
saying it's inevitable, but we don't have to succumb to it completely. Mm-hmm. We just have to be strategic and smarter and intentional to preserve the muscle mass instead of let it go. So she goes on to talk about muscle at every age, from early youth to 60s. So we can touch base a little bit on each of these, but she says start young. Some people think resistance training is bad for kids, and body weight or light weights, she says, is perfectly safe. And it, as long as you're using proper technique and form and you're holding off on the heavier weights until maybe puberty, it's good because it's setting up this muscle memory, she says.
Yeah. Back to that Physical Fitness Institute, and that was years ago. The idea was to use the weight of your body instead of additional weights as you were developing. I don't know. That's kind of new to think about little kids lifting weights.
So she says anything heavier than 5 to 10 pounds.
But if you're only a 40-pound person, that's a lot proportionally.
Yeah. I mean, my kids have picked up 2-pound weights.
Yeah. Well, my kids used to pick up a cow. Right up there in West Virginia, Tim. That's what
right. Cow tipping.
Yep. Yeah, you have to pick up a cow when it's a calf, and then you can lift it when it's a bull.
Yeah. I think that the key here is proper technique and form.
Yeah.
But the neat thing is this muscle memory. It's previously trained muscle increases myonuclei, and muscle fibers that have a higher number of myonuclei grow faster when exposed to resistance exercise in the future. So how cool is that? Like, it literally sets them up for success by starting off young. And even if it is just resistance training, it's maybe fun and age appropriate, or, frog jumps. Maybe it's push-ups, things like that. My kids are into gymnastics, and I love seeing them get strong. Proper technique is huge because it can kind of be hard to teach kids this, like a form of a push-up.
I was just working with a 7-year-old who's watching your kids and is not in that program.
Oh.
And he's on his hands all the time when I'm at his house. And
handstands?
yes.
Okay.
And, trying to help him get that balance and form to, put your legs together, look at where your heel is in relationship to your head, blah, 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 blah. But he's just consumed with wanting, it's like, can we get him in that program too? But,
he's into it, huh?
Oh, I think so.
Cool.
But one thing you didn't mention in here about, you said lifting weights when you're a child. What about the protein requirements for kids in relationship to that extra activity? Is that something that we should think about? I mean, if they're lifting weights, should they have protein in their diet?
Well, I think that we have to be careful to not overdo it because, as adults, we're a lot bigger and our protein needs, as we'll get into at another time, are quite large, and they're in smaller bodies, and they really don't need as much as most people think. Of course, if they're active and because they're growing, protein is absolutely important. But I don't want them to sacrifice carbohydrates and balance in effort to just get all this protein. And that's my concern as a dietitian and a parent.
Yeah, and I would say she's got a disclaimer here. She says, while this book is not specifically geared toward kids, it's critical to consider how the Lyon Protocol lays out sound principles for eating and exercise that can benefit the whole family. And the more physically active a child is, the more protein may be beneficial for their growth. So she said, I'm really not writing this book for kids.
So, okay, let's go on. So 20s and 30s.
But the idea is to start now. Don't wait.
Exactly.
Wherever you are in this decade discussion that we're getting ready to have.
Yes.
And you all know that we're doing the format of Well on our little podcast here, where we're telling you what we're talking about. And our topic is the longevity thing, right? Mm-hmm. And then we're explaining a little bit about it. And then we're going to try to link it to real life, which we've been doing. And then we're going to leave you with some tips at the end. So stay tuned as we go on.
Absolutely.
Hey, if you're as interested in prevention as I am, contact me, Eleanor Russell, at 360health, number 4, letter U.com. Whether you're interested in financial wellness or physical health products, 360 Health invites you to become part of our community.
So in your 20s and 30s, I like her description of this. She says, at a superficial level, you can get away with less than stellar nutrition and exercise habits. And in part because hormones like testosterone, growth hormone, and insulin-like growth factor are at their peak.
And so is your bone mass.
And so is your bone mass.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these poor habits can set the stage for trouble later, even though it may not present, you might be more tired or maybe you feel like you're fine, but later down the line, these definitely can have a consequence.
Hey, Kristen, in your practice with younger people like yourself or younger than you, because I'm older than you, and when I meet younger people, it's I find resistance to the idea. I mean, there's some mental thing about, I feel good. I don't need to do anything. So, this prevention story and the idea of who do you want to become and setting standards for yourself, if we can help people do that early, like even in their childhood, like they're saying, if you do some good things in your childhood, you'll have a good solid bone mass by the time you're in your 20s or 30s, and you may not need to lose it if you have these good habits. So that's a challenge for me to reach people to say, think about the daily things you're doing and consider the benefit for your future self and who you want to become.
It is hard. So it's kind of like financial planning too.
Yes, like we talked about nursing your financial health.
Like it's hard to think about your future self. It's just hard. And I know that working with at least teenagers, they're not motivated by the future. They're motivated by now. So sometimes you just have to tailor, if you're a coach or a dietitian or, someone trying to influence someone in their teen years, it has to focus on, how is this going to help you now? Even though it's going to help them long term, it's not going to be a motivating factor for them.
And don't you think, and she speaks to a couple of things in here too about community, because as she builds her protocol, she says you need to find out what kind of person you are. Do you need people around you or not? And I think helping people that do and particularly teenagers is what made me think of this. It's who's around them and what they're doing. And if they have good habits within that group, it's more likely they're going to have good habits.
Oh, yeah.
That idea of community.
And harder to maintain healthier habits if no one else is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and she does, Dr. Lyon does tie things like, okay, if you're in your 30s, you might be focusing on your career, and you're going to want the energy and the healthy cognition to really focus in and hone in on building your career. Or maybe you're having children and you're going to need that. You're going to need all the help with better sleep and increased energy.
And right now we know a lot of people are having trouble with fertility.
Yes, and fertility.
Yeah, so the idea of a healthy body and the opportunity for pregnancies and children.
And so for the reasons we've covered, like the blood glucose control and mitochondria, muscle health improves fertility in both male and females.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we often forget the male component there.
Yeah, yeah. And then pregnancy, a healthy skeletal muscle can help protect mothers against developing gestational diabetes. And, I know when I was pregnant, I wanted to be as strong as I could so that I had a healthy delivery.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I remember going to jazzercise classes in my first pregnancy.
Yeah.
Big old belly and a leotard on,
And people look at you like you're crazy, but you got to do it.
Well, actually, I was in New Jersey, and a New York Rockette was my teacher, so she didn't have any problem with it at all. It was
my
fun.
gosh,
it was
I love that.
Yeah.
I could picture that.
Yeah, me too. While we're talking on that, it's muscle-centric living, she says this on page 64, can boost your love life, helping you become more flexible and feel better naked.
Increase your libido.
Mm-hmm, and increase your libido. And then that idea of moving on to your mid-40s. You want to get there? I mean, after we've been through all the sex life, can we get to the 40s?
Okay. So, a little bit before the mid-40s, you can't get away with the same things you were doing in your 20s and without seeing some weight gain or body composition changes.
And why? Is that because we become less responsive to protein?
Yeah, tell us more about that.
Well, it's just what they're observing is that particularly lower doses of amino acids and changes in our tissue. So, if we're not eating protein and then we're becoming less responsive to it, then the benefits of the protein are not getting to happen. And that may be why we're being fatigued, cloudy focus, no energy is fatigue, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So, and then lack of resistance training or protein in the diet will result in even more muscle loss than what's going to happen naturally.
And then obesity.
And then, yeah.
The sequela.
And for that reason, exercise isn't just a vanity thing. If you don't move it, you're going to lose it. And that's starting in your 30s, but only increasing with each decade.
Yeah. Well, one of the things she mentions also is about obesity impairs muscle by creating a toxic metabolic environment in the muscle, and you get toxic fat byproducts that overpack our skeletal muscle suitcase, leaving us weak, less flexible, and unable to efficiently process the food calories we eat. And she goes into a lot of discussion about the essential components of protein synthesis. And how fat is interrupting that. And
is this the muscle marbling kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like when we buy meat and we see it with fat intertwined?
Yeah.
That could be actually what's happening in our body and how that affects...
Intramuscular adipose tissue, yes. I'm like a beefsteak.
So that would be
Yes, please.
Weaker and less healthy muscle mass that she's referring to. It's not going to be a metabolic powerhouse. It's going to struggle.
Yeah, but because of that less responsiveness, and you kind of shift it was building muscle in my 20s and 30s when I ate and was active. But now I'm in my 40s doing the same thing, and my muscles are less responsive to the protein. I don't know if we have an answer to why, but then the calories go into the fat. And then the fat creates these toxic metabolites, which interrupt it even more. So you set up this thing that you need to maybe balance out with moving your body.
Yeah. And then another component of that is when you get into menopause, a decline in hormones.
Or andropause.
It takes away even more protection and makes these things harder. Not impossible, she's saying, but it can be harder to build muscle and even more important in those cases to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you get that muscle mass loss, that sarcopenia that we started out talking about, then you can't move as well. And then, so it's a spiraling thing. Less muscle, less energy, less feel good because you're not moving them. All that stuff that we talked about earlier.
So that makes me think, wherever you're at, it's never too late to start, but also give yourself grace if starting is a little harder than normal. But don't give up, right? Just know that, okay, this might not be as easy as it was in the past, but this is still very important. And I can still do it, and it's highly impactful. Yeah,
and when we talk about longevity and get into the 60s decade and above, what you're really trying to do is safeguard your independence, because we know that, I am mobile. I go where I want by myself most of the time, and it's very difficult for me to comprehend or conceive of having to ask for help for everything I do. That is a life I don't want to live.
I don't think anybody wants to live that, right?
I don't want to live that life. So what I can do that keeps me independent is going to make me a contributing member to society, I hope, and I'm going to enjoy doing that. But if we fall and hurt ourselves like a fracture, because your bone mass was highest in your 20s or 30s, according to what we know scientifically, it's diminishing with each decade. Gets more fragile, and you start having bone density tests after age 60 or something, or 50 maybe. But you break a bone, it's a predictor for death.
Yeah.
It's and particularly in hips and things like that, where you really are then out flat and not moving, which then helps the speed of decline increase. So, anything we can do to protect our independence, I think, is a joy.
Absolutely. You remember, I think it was in Outlive, we learned about a gal who loved gardening, and then she had a fall, and then was pretty much unable to move, and her quality of life diminished, and she became depressed. And I could see how that's easy to happen. It can happen, right? So protecting your independence, and this could mean going to a physical therapist maybe and getting like a fall risk appraisal and see what kind of exercises could just help protect you against falls, if anything else.
And I'm going to bring up a nutritional thing because she says, as I've mentioned, older adults need more dietary protein to support good health, promote recovery from illness, and maintain functionality. So, and resistance training along with the protein. Yeah.
So, protein is this trend, and Eleanor, we were talking whether we did this segment called Gem or Trend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it feels very trendy, like, oh, everybody's got to get their protein in. But it's on purpose. There is a reason, and it is, I would call a gem, not a trend. And we'll talk about this in another podcast, but the standard recommendations are not the best, and we need to go above and beyond. So if you're wondering, is all this worry about protein really necessary? And yeah, it is, because we actually need more as we age.
Yeah. So linking this to real life, Kristen, you want to share your strength training journey?
Yeah. So, I'm in my 40s now.
What?
I know. And I was starting to feel like a decline in my strength and power. And listen, I was a gymnast, and then I was a cheerleader in college. So I had that strong beginning of,
activity,
of muscle mass and activity and strength training. So I could start to feel it, and I didn't like it. And so but I'm not very consistent on my own. I'm active, I walk and things like that. But when it comes to strength training, I knew that I was just like, I'll do it one week and I won't the next, or I'll do it twice here. And I would never push myself too far beyond my comfort zone on my own either. So that's another thing, as being on a team sport all my life. I had a coach pushing me, right? And so that was helpful. And so I knew I needed to do something, and then something interesting happened to me. I won a free month at this cool place called Ignite Performance, and I figured, why not? I ended up loving it, and now I've gone twice a week since January, and I've noticed a big change in my power and my muscle. And if you follow me on Instagram, you can see some pictures of me lifting pretty heavy, and that feels really cool. I've gained muscle, and it's been really empowering. And for me, it's like that spills over into the rest of my life. And Eleanor on the last episode says, who do you want to become? And I do think I want to become someone who can just take on any adventure life has at whatever age and stage, and keep up with future grandchildren and things like that. And I think I'm not alone. I think that motivates a lot of people, and others want that too.
Yeah, and having worked with young medical professionals, I asked them that question, what do you want to do when you're older? And everybody has that same story. I want to play with grandkids. I want to travel. I want to go wherever I want to go. But then the next question is, what are you going to do to allow that to occur?
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing. You're taking an active step, intentional, saying, this will be the as Gabriel says, make a plan. That's your goal. So what are you going to do today that's going to help you get to that? And you know that this resistance training is already showing you it's going to more likely lead you to that outcome than not doing that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so to leave you listeners with something to try out, it's never too late to build muscle. And it's important at every stage of life.
So while I was reading this book, I thought, what am I going to do? So it was like I'd read for 30 minutes, and then I'd stand up and do 10 squats on my chair.
That's perfect.
Yeah. So that's something that is, if you want to do something, listeners, it can be something that simple, or it could be get up and just walk out the front door to the end of your sidewalk and back, and then sit back down and watch TV. Or whatever it was you were knitting or crafting. I know you like to craft, because there are a lot of things we like to do. And reading, you sit. So being conscious of I'm being sedentary, and then structuring something that jolts you out of that.
Yeah, and I love that you start small, because we've learned from tiny habits that we can build on that. I love every chapter we're going to do some squats, or like you go to the bathroom and okay, I'm going to do a couple wall push-ups after I wash my hands.
Well, actually, I have steps in my house, and I'm trying to, and I might put a sticky on the step. That might be a good idea. I just thought of that. That when I go up the steps, I stop and do push-ups on the steps.
Nice. Yeah.
And I do 10 or I do 15, but I don't do it consistently. So maybe that sticky will help me remember, oh yeah, you said you were going to do that, do it.
Oh, okay.
It just takes a minute. I mean, less than a minute.
And that reminds me, a big challenge to this, we talked through all the ages, in your 30s, let's say, when you have young kids, it's hard to fit in time to actually go to a gym maybe or whatever. So along those lines, when my kids were in the bath, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to do 10 push-ups because I'm just sitting here watching you. Yeah. Instead of on the phone. Yeah. Maybe you do some push-ups or something.
You weren't
like
scrolling.
That. So if you're in one of those busier phases, do what Eleanor and I have done and fit small things in because they matter.
We want to encourage you all to adopt a healthy, active lifestyle. There are good benefits. And I'm Eleanor at 360health, 4u.com. And if you are interested in preventing less than optimum outcomes, there's no guarantee ever, but there are things we can do to decrease risks of bad outcomes. And I like to help people do that, particularly with selection of products that don't contribute to toxic exposures. Eleanor Russell, 360 Health for you.
And I'm Kristen, one of the registered dietitians at Well Balanced Nutrition. And if you're like me, you need accountability. And I love that I have a trainer now to keep me accountable. And registered dietitians can keep you accountable to healthy habits as well. And if you would like to work with one of us, we invite you to visit wellbalancednutrition.com. Insurance might even cover it. And you can start with a free clarity call there.
and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.